Yeah, because I think that the top program is a great idea. I think it's a very appropriate and useful concept to certify those producers who want to, uh, who are already doing, are interested in organics but don't know how to do it. And the top program concept is have other producers serve as mentors to these interested parties who are called mentees and have them participate in the outreach and education and information so that they can become certified organic. And I think that at the national level, the top program seems to be operating and functional and effective. However, to start there rather than start from my own experience, which I'll go into, I think that it's important to recognize the fact that even at the national level, when I attended a top meeting in Oregon, the administrative people who are running the program say the simple truth, which is this is really the starting point, and they have a 5-year allocation of resources to do it. This is not something that we're going to get achieved and completed in the time frame allocated because it's too short of a time to expect, like I discussed, things like transition, which is a 3-year period, etc., and or getting at the state level of Hawaii, getting people to trust the people they're talking to. So, from my own perspective, when I'm dealing with the farms that I'm the mentor for, one of my desire, the uh, one of the most common questions for me that they provide is, what resources can we tap? Who can we talk to? Who has experience on the ground with this question? Who is dealing with this here in, my neighbors in Hawaii, et cetera. And there isn't really a functional, clear network of uh, organic farmers to link each other with, because I can do it via the organic certifiers, but those people don't want, conflict of interest. They can't be telling, giving contact to other farmers. And so they will then, as the inspector, they'll just want to say what the answer is from their limited experience for their own, whoever they're certifying. And I can reference other farms who I'm friends with who are doing certain things, but that's also like somewhat limited, but not impossible as a strategy. But there isn't a existing ongoing uh, clear network of people. Human beings like to interact with each other, like to talk to each other, like to talk story, like to chit chat about these topics and or visit other farms and see things. And there isn't an easy way to access that at that extreme level, or like I already said, at the level of, which cooperative extension agent can I have them talk to? Which nonprofit organization can I direct them to? Where is this information so that people could explore questions? And I think ideally it could be through an entity like CTAR or NRCS, but really I hesitate even on those questions when a question is very specific, like how do I deal with this problem with this crop? It's like, I don't think there's any research on that here, and I don't know who's going to answer
Well,
that. They're going to have to do some research. And so I think that that's one of the difficulties I faced, but one of the successes I've faced is, I've dealt with is the fact that people are wanting to ask the questions and they're wanting to seek getting the answers. And I think that it's uh, for me, that's one of the reasons that I went to that top meeting in Oregon was like, how can we make this information more accessible and referenceable to the interested parties? Because it's unclear how to do it as a mentor when I can tell them you can come to my farm and we can talk about my cacao that I grow on my farm, but I don't have a problem that you're having with little fire ant on my cacao. So I can't tell you how to organically deal with little fire ant on your cacao on your farm. Um, and so then it just becomes not a problem conversation, but it's like if you want to talk about how I grow cacao, we can talk about that. But then many times, I think that humans want, I think both conventional and organic farmers want, what answer works? How can we deal with this? How can we address this problem? And I think the organic community isn't very well put together in the state of Hawaii in terms of good communication happening. And like I said, the certifiers currently are all from outside of Hawaii. And so any certification paperwork that gets approved every year for my annual certification is inspected in an office outside of the state of Hawaii. And so it's not
you
being
don't use
reviewed.
the local certifier there on the Big Island?
The
Um,
inspectors are local,
oh, the inspector. Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
there's
You're right.
no local entity.
You're right.
So the
Yeah.
inspectors are local people that are contracted,
Hmm.
but all of the final decision is all made in offices by people who don't live in Hawaii, that don't
That's
even
true.
understand what they're reviewing. And so I
That's
think that from my perspective, that's one of the biggest, like I referred to earlier with, Hawaii is very different than all of these other states. And when you look at the organic question, organic certification question, uh, when you're having to enforce national rules on something, you want the reviewers, the final reviewers, to be able to understand what they're reviewing. And if the final reviewers are all people in offices, in far away, they might understand it a little bit or tangentially from their experience of reviewing other applications and other certifications, but they're not going to understand it hands on generally. And I think that that's, in my opinion, the biggest thing that Hawaii is missing. And if I had to advise any one thing at all regarding organics at the state level, I would say the Department of Ag has to have an organic specialist on staff and has to be required to, because
well,
there's nothing within the Department of Ag except for we'll contact, other entities. And I think it's a huge missing part of the state's commitment to organic.
there is some resource, right? So through the Sustainable Organic Ag Program through CTAR, there's some information available, but there hasn't been in-depth study of, like, for example, specific pests and the use of organic pesticides, right? There's, you use your traditional, your neems and your insecticidal soaps, things that are, um, um, you know, NOP compliant, and you're referred to the inputs approved website, and that's pretty much it. But regarding what is actually which one of those pesticides or herbicides, fungicides that are approved for organic use, which ones work best here under these specific conditions or micro conditions, there I would agree, I don't know of that research being done. But we do have extension agents who are assigned to the Sustainable Organic Ag program. They're SOAP agents, and they're on Kauai, and two of them are here. We have our specialist, um, Dr. Radovich, and they have a wealth of knowledge. But like I said, like for literatures, if a farmer or producer wanted to grab some kind of publication or literature or have a discussion about, okay, well, I have fire ants, the tiny red fire ants on my orchard. I need to get rid of them. I don't know. Just me personally, I don't know that there has been organic specific research done on that. And I think that's really relevant. I think that's something that we need to really highlight and do something about. I think it's important that you have these discussions to highlight these areas where we can improve on. I think that's really great. And is there? Sorry, I got off on a tangent, but
No,
I
you're
think
good.
I think that you hit on a lot of important topics and then increase in conversation. One of the things I wrote down was um, the NRCS workshops. We did have a workshop which was very poorly attended. a couple months ago, and they were talking about some kind of reimbursements, organic transition reimbursements through NRCS, and that can be found on the SOAP website, and it's there for people to have access to. It's in the archives, and I can send you that, and I can put a link at the bottom on our
Yeah.
podcast description. And then I also wrote down that we need to talk about creating a organic farmers network. I think that's really relevant. But I would suggest through Hawaii Tropical Fruit Growers, a lot of those guys, some of them are home growers and hobbyists, but I think a lot of them, they grow organically and they choose organically because of the exposures. And we know through the research and the data that's out there that continuous exposure to some of these petrochemicals and these harsh pesticides will cause adverse effects not only to us but also the environment. And that's the reason why they choose to go organic. Now, when you guys, going back, when you guys in 2001 became certified organic, foundationally, what was your impetus in becoming certified organic? Was it a ethical one, or was it a cost, or was it both, or a ROI, I should say, return on your investment, if you wanted to get that premium, or was it something broader than that and more wide reaching?
I mean, I think, yeah, back to that original question is a good ending point for this conversation. But I think that from my experience, like I indicated earlier, I think that all agriculture could and should be organic. And so I think that my primary motivation is going to be considered environmental. But I think that I just cannot understand the logic and the scientific rationale for arguing that it should be done a different way. Like you said, you can always factor in the economics and recognize I can make more money if I'm organic. We even have, the biggest organic Kona coffee farm is producing at the highest levels of production possible because they're doing all the organic inputs and their output is as high as anybody's output for Kona coffee. And so it's not a question and then they're selling their Kona coffee for nearly double, the rate of the conventional. So it's like, there's no economic logic to the argument that you couldn't make as much or more money, even if your production is lower, which I think at a small scale level, generally speaking, we recognized early on that our production is not going to be as high because we're going to be organic, but we're going to sell at slightly higher prices, and so we'll make up for that. And I think in the 23 years we've been here, that's always been the truth. Is that some of our customer base at the farmers market wants the local products, but even if I'm selling those products directly through a farmers market at the equivalent to a retail price, and people don't care if it's organic or not, and they're not going to pay me a subsidy because it's organic, that's okay because I'm still getting a higher price than I would get if I sold it wholesale organic. And so for my approach is I can figure out, if I look at the whole picture, how to make our farm operate economically from an organic perspective by paying attention to what marketing venues I use and how I do it. Like if we sell processed coffee, we're going to be making the money that otherwise the middle person is making if I sell unprocessed coffee. And so I think that factoring those issues into organic is important, but I think that many farms don't want to be doing things like processing or doing things like selling at a farmer's market. And I can recognize that. And I think that then you get out of my personal experience question and into the fact that how can people justify the extra expenses and the lower potential lower production of being certified organic. And I think the answer for me is the environmental impact and looking at the broader questions. And I think that, from my experience recently that I referenced of attending the top meeting and the NOSB meeting in Oregon last month, what came out of it for me was that something that applies at the local level too, which is that it's really critical to communicate with one another. And that's what I've always found with the organic farming, even before I lived in Hawaii, and even uh, in my other pursuits for master's degrees, et cetera, is if you don't communicate well with each other and talk to one another, you're not really getting the hands-on functional experiences. And I think that that's where not just the questions or ideas, but that's where things grow so that people are invested by having spoken to one another and raised questions with each other. And then coordination can occur because then you can trust people, or you like them, or you want to hang out with them, or they're your neighbor. And then through that effective connection, then you have coordination and you have the capacity to seek real change and or influence other people. And I think, it makes me just want to refer to the Organic Food Production Act, which is the law of organics in the United States, which states, and I'm not going to quote what it states, but it states that things are required to improve over time in an organic system. That is one of the requirements in the law, that you can't be maintaining status quo. Things have to be getting better. So you have to be not relying on off-farm inputs and never having a way to get away from that. You have to not be constantly just having to have a system that can't operate without your the goal has to be to have it be a self-functioning system. And that goal is hard for people to conceptualize, I think, as farmers. But I think that if you look at the whole ecosystem and you look outside of your farm and you look at what naturally occurs, those things didn't need humans doing certain inputs at certain times in order to survive. And I would argue the opposite, that humans have made it much, 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 much harder. And so I think if a farm is managed in that way, then you are instead looking at how can the farm maintain itself, even if you took a break. And, I have all of the problems everybody has. Like, our farm when we moved here was covered with desmodium and still is primarily covered with desmodium. And we're replacing it with perennial peanuts, but perennial peanuts is nowhere near as aggressive and or tall growing as desmodium, which will climb everything. And they both fix nitrogen. Those are great things. But, then you have, okay, I have to manage this. And so I still am spending a lot of time weed whacking, which I'd rather spend no time weed whacking. So I think you can personalize those problems really easily. But I think if you just look at the bigger picture of recognizing that, hey, let's figure out how to be incorporating things like I just said, nitrogen, which is your primary macronutrient input. How can we be getting that from things besides bringing in bags of fertilizer? We can be doing, cover crops. And our farm is perennials. And a lot of the farms in Kona are things like coffee or cacao, and having perennial cover crops underneath them is not a hard thing to do, as an example. So I think that, cover crops can be harder for some other organic systems, but they aren't that hard. I think, I previously worked for Rodale Institute, who did, 35 years study on organics. And their conclusion from their research was, if you just look at 3 to 5 years, organics is going to be more expensive. But if you look at it once it's established and it's ongoing over a long period of time and it's rotating and happening, it's cheaper and more productive. And so it really depends on what you're comparing when people like to compare organics to conventional, because I think that they're totally different realities. I don't think it's a comparable truth. And you can't compare, oh, well, we did this side by side and this is different than this. I think you have to look at an organic system which develops over a long period of time in order to make real comparisons. And I think that's what I was saying also about the top program is, 3-4 years, that's something to get started with, but you need a longer program in order to get established. And
Yeah,
so,
I would definitely agree with everything you said, Colhour. I mean, I think nobody really cares what I think, but I'm just gonna say, um,
well, disagree.
organic process is, to me, is a marketing. It's just pure marketing. I think if we go back to the fundamentals of working with nature rather than controlling it, but using what it does naturally, to work together with it, and then that process is a long-term process. Anything now, we can look at medicine, we can look at our health, we can look at just the way that the natural environments work. They're not fast. They naturally are. They progress in a steady pace, but it's not rapid. It's not fast. It's not a overnight type of thing. And I think we need to get away from this fast paced way of growing, eating, living, right? And it's easier said than done, of course. But when we start to eat the foods that are eat slow foods, traditional cultural foods that are grown slow in a soil that is managed in an appropriate way, which over time will accumulate minerals and the nitrogen for all the macro and micros over time, it comes back to us and we become a healthier society. But also we start focusing on what is really important. And I think that's what organic kind of is telling us, like, hey, this fast way of growing potatoes or growing things without adding the full spectrum of nutrients, just a quick way because we produce it quick, we have it, and the plants can utilize it immediately, hasn't been working out. And we can see that it goes from an agrarian foundation all the way up to societal. And I'm just looking at it like in those spheres because it's easier for me to conceptualize. But I think that's maybe what you're talking about in terms of the long-term benefits of organic. It's a system, it's a way of life. It is beneficial not only to us, but to the like full environment, everything. And it's pretty amazing when you do manage something like a small, like let's say your garden organically, you'll see like all these different organisms just pop up that you didn't even realize before. And they just start to live, and it's really cool to see. And your plants are healthier, and you actually produce more flavorful foods because they're getting everything that they need. And that's what, I don't know. Like I said, nobody really cares what I say. So I think it's really
No,
important
yeah.
to continue your
I think
work.
you're very right, and I think that in this moment where we are right now in 2024, we're facing as a species and as a world climate change, which is a very significant shift. And I think that organic agriculture is a massive component of how to affect climate change because conventional agriculture is relying on petrochemical inputs, fertilizer and the pesticides, but fertilizer is massive
Mhm.
percentage, and there's no organic system to be able to make that carbon like be not part of the problem. And so if I think organic agriculture actually could and is a piece of addressing the climate change question, which some people like to argue that that's not a relevant question, but it's pretty obvious that it's a very relevant question and we can't ignore it. And I think you're kind of not wrong that the Agricultural Marketing Service, which is AMS, which is where organic is housed within the USDA, is focused on marketing. But the truth is that that doesn't mean that the National Organic Program, which is housed under AMS in the USDA, can and should only focus on marketing. And I'll just comment about the truth, which is I served on the National Organic Standards Board for 5 years. And during that service, there is one rule, and it's actually a rule in OFPA, in Organic Food Production Act, that says that the members of the National Organic Standards Board we cannot, when we're making decisions, focus on an economic question, an economic variable when we're making a decision. So when we're making a recommendation to the National Organic Program, which they require, it's actually the only federal advisory committee that we had to make recommendations before they could take actions. Out of the 2,200 federal advisory committees, that's the only one that the input's required. And we could not be making those recommendations based on an economic variable. We had to not include that. And it's ironic because we're housed underneath the Agricultural Marketing Service Program, which is marketing. But that's not a factor for deciding about organics what things can be used.
I think producers influence that.
They did.
Yeah, very much so. And that's during the top meetings that some of the advisors are there, and they talk about the discussions and the input that they provided for the next the updating of the NOP and how it should be managed and how things should be thought of. And those were all producers, and those also academia and horticulture. But I think those folks like you guys on the ground have influenced that. But I don't think that that's what it originally was. But you're right. There's some pretty cool laws in place to make sure that organic is really organic and not just a logo.
Yeah, well, I think that's, like you said about people buying local versus organic. I think that that's one of the outreach and education things that needs to be addressed and dealt with, which is they don't need to be separated, and we need to recognize the many decades of work that have gone in from organic producers primarily, because it was actually organic producers who had state level certification entities around the country who were like, we got to bring this together into something national because this isn't working. In the 1970s and 1980s, this is not really working every state has different rules and is doing things differently. We need to find a common place so we can work together. And it was in the 1980s, it was a pretty big, not conflict, but problem. Should we house this under the USDA, or can we trust the government to actually look out for the true interests of organics? And so that's why some really well thought through things were put into the law, was because they recognized the need to protect organic producers because of to establish a secure foundation. And I think that's organics is built on a secure foundation, but I think that the United States now is lagging. And I'm not looking at my notes from that recent meeting I went to, but the truth is that the European Union is going to require things like organic seeds are used in organic agriculture in the European Union in like 10 years. Whereas the United States is hesitating and hemming and hawing and saying, well, we can't require organic seeds because they aren't always available, and we shouldn't require organic seeds because then there won't. And so none of the seed producers are making sure that the organic varieties are available because they don't have to, because the law allows you to do exceptions. And so I think other places are now getting ahead of where the United States, which is the hypothetical leader of organic definitions around the world, and the European Union is like, we're going to take this action. And I really encourage the people at the National Organic Program, the NOP, and people that are in meetings like I'm involved in the National Organic Coalition as a nonprofit, which is really advising all of these people administratively. Like, we should just follow suit and put a law in place that makes it so that organic seeds are required, because that's one of the foundational pieces that if you don't have organic seeds, how can you say you have organic? And so it's a catch-22 where it's like, well, but we want to do organic, so we got to do some seeds, because like we talked about, some of the varieties won't grow very well in Hawaii, et cetera. And so I think that creating a unsolvable problem out of something that was meant to be, we can build from here, I think is not the way to go. I think instead we should figure out how to strive for the best and strive for a healthy, strong foundation, because it's very hard to rebuild a foundation. Um, so
Yeah. Well, Colhour, I really appreciate your time. One last question.
yeah.
If there was any bit of advice that you would tell someone who's on the fence about becoming certified organic in Hawaii, given their small farm, what would that be?
Your question is very appropriate and an excellent question, and I think that the strongest advice I've been able as a mentor to provide, and the strongest advice that I, generally speaking, think of when people indicate any interest in being certified organic is, it's not that complicated of a process once you get over that immediate first hurdle of engaging in it and doing it. And so I think that from an outsider's perspective, from a small farmer perspective, it appears like there's no way I can wrap my brain around this and do all these things, whether or not they're already a farmer in a conventional manner or they're not. That doesn't matter. It's just like, can I add all of these things? And I think that many people come into the situation thinking this is too many things to try to make happen, specifically in the state of Hawaii, because I can't find the support I need, or I don't know who to talk to. And I think that the advice I would give is keep trying and keep seeking people to talk to and keep asking for references of other people, because I think it might just be talk to your neighbor, but it might not be. It might be, get a reference from Cooperative Extension, get a reference from SOAP, go onto the internet and see how people are doing it in other places if you can't find or trust somebody. And if you need to talk to, many of us need to talk to people directly and in person. If you need to do that, start asking people to talk to you, because all that's going to happen is, even if you get 5 no's, you're eventually going to get someone to say yes. So start interacting with people and or the internet, and seek not information per se, but ways to get the support that you need, because the support is out there and is around you. It just might be invisible because you might not recognize it. And I think that it might be something as simple as go to a local store where you see organic things sold and ask them who you might talk to, or ask them for a reference. Or so just open up your brain and look for options and opportunities to communicate with others, because I think that organics requires communication, but I think it also depends on us supporting each other. And I think that most all organic producers that I'm aware of are willing to support one another, at least uh, superficially, and or a lot more detail if you just ask. So I think asking people is critical, and we are around and out there. Like I said, even if everybody's not certified, people have experience, and there's plenty of people who were certified, but then they develop a market and don't need to be certified anymore. And that's fine too, if they're doing the same activities. And so I think that it might not be you might talk to people who are not certified and why they're not certified anymore, and what the value was of going through the process. So I think it's just talk to other people, I think is my answer.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Colhour, and we appreciate your input. I mean, it's pretty in depth, and your experience is spot on. And I'm very thankful that you are a mentor to some of these producers. And I think you're if I was to be going through the situation, I think I'd be like, hey, come talk to you. I'd come talk to you and a bunch of other folks, because it can be very daunting, and it sounds like producers are intimidated, and I can see why. It's not for no reason, but your words are of encouragement are reassuring, and I hope people have gleaned some gems from our discussion, and I just really appreciate your time that you gave to us this today, and I'm hoping that you'll be open to continue this conversation a little more, maybe sometime next 2025, and see where we are then, and see how far we've gotten um, with the NOP, and maybe we can talk about some additional topics with in under the organic umbrella. Uh, Thank you so much, Colhour. I really appreciate your
No,
time.
Eric, thank you very much for hosting, and thank you for this conversation. And I aloha to this effort and this energy, because I think it's where we all need to be progressing and working together. So I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Right? Thank you.
Okay. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Bye bye.